After completing this lesson, you'll be able to understand 2D detailing, load a detail component, create a repeating detail, add repeating details, and create detail groups. The objective domains covered are 1.1G, understand the functions and limitations of model and detail groups, 3.2A, load and create a detail component family, 3.2B, add a detail component, and 3.2C, define a repeating detail. When creating a Revit model, the level of detail needs to be carefully considered. For example, you may choose not to model small items such as bolts, fixings, and other elements such as grout and membranes. If these items are modelled in a large project, the file size and model performance may suffer. Instead, you can represent items such as these with 2D details. The image on the left shows an original section from the 3D model. The image on the right-hand side is the same view but has been 2D detailed to convey full construction details. Repeating details are detail components that are configured to pattern along a path. For example, a roof tile can be repeated along the slope of a roof, or a shear stud can be patterned along a composite floor deck. Revit contains a library of repeating details. However, it is prudent to know how to create your own repeating details. Go ahead and open up the model 025, creating and using detail components. The model opens up in the section Composite Slab Edge Detail. In this view, you can see that we have some 3D model elements, such as structural framing, floors, and columns. Other elements, such as this casting channel and bolt detail, are detailed with 2D detail components and filled regions and masking regions. These elements would only appear in this view. Let's go ahead and load a 2D detail component and then place that down on the view. To do this, select the Annotate ribbon, select the Component tool, and then select Detail Component. In the Properties palette in the Type selector, you can see the detail components that are loaded in our current project. To complete our detail, we need to load a shear stud. On the Context ribbon, you'll note we can load Family. We can now navigate through the folders to find the specific family we're interested in. So this is Division 5, Metals. And here we're going to open up the first folder, and then Metal Fastenings. And in the list here, we'll find we have Shear Connectors side. Let's go ahead and open this. In the Properties palette, we can now navigate to our shear connector, and here we have different sizes available. In this example, we're going to select the 1/2" shear connector. And we can then go ahead and place that down on the view. To improve the process, we can make use of a repeating detail. We may require a shear stud at every second position on our metal deck. To achieve this, we can use a repeating detail. On the Annotate ribbon, you'll note here under Detail Component, we have Repeating Detail Component. This is simply a 2D detail component that is designed to repeat or instance. So you'll notice by default here, I have a concrete masonry unit that I can produce just by pointing the mouse and clicking. In this example here, we're required to create a new repeating detail for our shear stud. So here, I'm going to click Edit Type, and we'll duplicate this style. So here, we'll have a shear stud with a 16" spacing. We can then go ahead and choose our shear stud. So we want the 1/2" shear stud. We're utilising a fixed distance in here, but of course we could use maximum spacing, or we could have a fixed number. And then we have to declare our spacing, which we've said is going to be 16 inches. And then generally here, we'll need to rotate our detail component. In this case, it will be 90 degrees clockwise. Let's go ahead and select OK. We can now test our repeating detail out in space over here, and we can see that it appears to be working correctly. So now we can go ahead and place our repeating detail. And you can now see we've placed a shear stud every second position. Next, we place two 3/4 inch bolts on this connection here. On the Annotate ribbon, select the component pull down and then select Detail Component. In the Properties palette in the Type selector, we can search. So here, I'm going to do a search for 3/4 inch. And you can see in this example that it's found our 3/4 inch bolt, but also found the shear connector 3/4 inch. Let's select the 3/4 inch bolt. Note that you can press the spacebar to orientate and rotate the detail component. So we'll now place our first bolt down. We need to change the length of the bolt, so we can select the detail component and we can use the shape handle here to change the length of the bolt. Also, we need to ensure that it's set out in the correct position from the top of the beam. So in this case here, we're going to set this to 2.5 inches. We can now mirror the bolt around the central axes of our beam. Let's go ahead and select the bolt. And on the context ribbon, we can select Mirror Pick Axes. We can then select the central axes of our beam and the bolt is mirrored. You'll notice that this particular detail component is showing us the shank of the bolt. What I might want to do is have the option of removing the visibility of the shank. For example, if I select the bolt, you'll notice in the instance properties, the only thing I can change here is the length. So what we're going to do now is edit this detail component and add in some functionality to control the visibility of the shank. On the context ribbon, select Edit Family. The detail component opens up in the Family Editor. For clarity, the Annotations category has been removed from this particular detail component family. To see this, let's select the View ribbon and select Visibility Graphics. In the Visibility Graphic Override dialog, let's select Annotation Categories and select Show Annotation Categories in this view. You'll now notice that the reference planes, annotations and dimensions are now displayed. Now here we have two detail lines representing the bolt shank. I'm going to hold the Control key down and select both of these detail lines. Note in the Properties palette we have the option of removing the visibility of these items. If I did this, this would permanently remove these items from the family. I want to control this with a parameter. So just to the right of this, I have Associate Family Parameter. Let's go ahead and select this. Currently, there are no parameters to associate this to. So what I'm going to do here is create a new parameter. Here, we'll call this one Bolt Shank Visibility. And here, we're going to make this an instance parameter. You'll notice that the type of parameter is a yes/no. That's because we've selected the visibility option that can only be yes or a no. And we'll group parameters under dimensions. Let's go ahead and select OK. We can then select OK again to the Associate Family Parameter dialog box. Now you may notice in the project environment, when we use this particular detail component, the shank of the bolt masks out other elements underneath it. To do that, it must have a masking region underneath. Let's check this. If we move over the shank and then press the Tab key, you'll notice here that we can cycle our selection, and in fact here you'll see that we have a masking region. Let's go ahead and select the masking region, and once again in the Properties palette, we'll associate the family parameter. Here we can click the same parameter, Bolt Shank Visibility, and then select OK. It's now time to go ahead and test this. Again, to declutter the display here, we'll now remove our annotation categories again. So I'm just going to right mouse here and repeat the visibility graphics. Select Annotation Categories and then remove Show Annotation Categories in this view. We can test the operation of a family by using this tool on the View Control toolbar, Preview Visibility. Currently it's set to off. Let's set it to on. On the Modify ribbon, select Family Types. In the dialog box, you'll now note that we have a new control for bolt shank visibility. Let's uncheck this and then select Apply. You should now notice that the shank disappears. If we recheck the option and then select Apply again, the shank reappears. We'll go ahead and switch the preview visibility off. Of course, I could do Save As, but in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and load this into Project and close. So here, I'll say No to save changes. And of course, in a project environment, I want to overwrite the existing bolt. So that's now complete. We can go ahead and select the two bolts. And in the Properties palette, I can now select Bolt Shank Visibility and remove that. And of course, you'll now see that those lines and masking region are suppressed for these two bolts that I've selected. Because this is an instance parameter, each bolt will have the option of showing or removing the shank. So in this example, of course, I do want to see the shank. I might want to save our detail components and line work so I can apply it to another slab edge. To do this, I would create a detail group. I can window select everything in the view, and then on the context ribbon, I'll go ahead and select Filter. I'll check None, and here I'm going to select Detail Items and also my line work. Let's select OK. On the context ribbon, you'll note that we can now create a group. For the group name, we'll call this one Slab Edge Detail, and then select OK. So the detail has now been saved. In the project browser, you'll note that we have a folder for groups, and here we have our detail group. If I'd like to use this in another view, I can simply drag and drop it and place it down. Very much like other groups, if I want to edit it or change it, I can select the group, and on the context ribbon, I could click Edit Group. Here, we could add new components or items, or remove components and items. Once we've done that, when we select Finish, it will update all the other groups in the project. It may be the case that we have a slightly different detail on a slab edge. What we can then do is select the group, and we can ungroup. And that essentially explodes the group back down into detail items, line work, and detail components. And of course, then we can make changes without affecting the other groups. Okay, there's our composite slab edge detail complete.